Okay, so we are going to build ourselves some network cables. Our first network cable will be a straight through network cable. Afterwards we will follow up with a crossover network cable. The difference of the two we'll get to along the way, but for the time being we're just going to focus on the first network cable. We are going to use category 5E network wire, which is more or less the standard that they have now. There is a category 6 out there, but category 5E has kind of been around for quite some time now and is more or less the standard. So to start, we have a box of network cable here. This box started, it was 1,000 feet of wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chop this little piece off here because I wanted to show a couple of quick demonstrations on stuff. Now I'm not going to use this to make the cable. I'm just going to use this for some demonstrations. I already have a piece here where I've already put one end on, and I'm actually going to, when I do my demonstration, I will put an end on here. I just want to start with this piece so that when at the end when we test, you can see actually a successful test. So I'll just put that there for the time being. Now, in order to make a network cable, obviously we need cable to start. We also need the ends that get plugged into either the computer or the router or the switch. These are RJ45 type ends, RJ standing for regular jack, and so these will go one on each end of the wire. Like I say, I already have one on this piece, so we'll get started that way. And the tooling required for it, you don't need all these tools. I just put them here because I wanted to give you a quick example of what you can use to do this. Required, you do require a crimping tool. This crimping tool is used specifically for the ends, and depending on how well you can see, there's pins here that will get pressed down and pinched into the wires. Hopefully you can see that. Maybe, maybe not. There is an image of it in the handout, which I will be referring to, so don't fret, we'll get to that. So you definitely have to have a crimping tool, mandatory. The testing tool isn't really necessary, but if you're trying to send a cable off somewhere where you're not actually using it yourself, it's always good to have a tester so that you know that it actually works. The only other thing you require is some sort of cutting tool. All of these tools are some variation of a cutting tool. These here are flush cutters. These are pretty much standard in most electronic shops, these ones here. This here is a stripping tool, so it's stripping here. This is used for crimping ends on for butt joining wires together. This has a cutting tool here. You can see it says wire cut here. You know what? These are garbage. These are cheap ones. I brought them out more or less so that I can just show you that they're there. If you had a better pair, they can be fairly effective, but for me, the ones I have, I bought them for this end, so these ones are just garbage. Now the crimping tool that we discussed there a second ago also has some cutting surfaces on it. This here is for actually cutting off, and this side here is for stripping. Now you can't really use the stripping side for this type of wire. It's made for a silver satin type wire, and you can see that the cutter, there's a space here where it stops, where if you put the wire in, it stops there, and that's to actually measure the length. If you were putting these ends on this silver satin type wire, you could just put it in, give it a squeeze, pop it off, and Bob's your uncle. But for this type of wire that doesn't work, you can see how tightly the blades go together, so that's literally going to cut this wire off. Besides, in this case here, we need to actually end up with a fairly significant amount of wire. Like I say, if we just did this and I stripped it off. We have a little tiny piece here. Trying to work with this would be aggravating, to say the least. So we won't be using that. Let me just get this a little bit out of here. There we go. Now it does have a cutting side here. You can use that if you wanted to, where you would actually feed the wire through. If you squeezed ever so slightly on there, this side here, I'm not sure if you can see that, hopefully you will, it's just starting to cut into it. You could, if you squeezed right through it, would cut it right off. So if you were just to squeeze a little bit, there's only one cutting surface on this, so you could then twist this around like that, and you could pull it off, and you can see it would cut it off. That does work pretty well, and I have used that many times in the field when I've been making these cables. It does work. It won't be the main demonstration that I use. I prefer to use side cutters for this. It doesn't require as much, say, finesse as this does. I mean, feel free to, if you want to try those, feel free to. I'm not saying any one of these are better than the other. All of them work more or less as effectively. It's whatever you become comfortable with yourself. I will be using side cutters like these now, and I will show you how to cut the sheathing off using these in just a minute or so. There's two different types. I have the smaller ones, the big ones. They work exactly the same. These are your regular wire cutters. They're also known side cutters because you can see the cutting surfaces on the side of it. The regular cutters are the cutters in the middle. And the last ones is needle nose pliers. You can see there's two different types here. They have a cutting surface here. The other one is here. It's the same thing. They're two different types, one smaller, one bigger. They work as well. You can use them in exactly the same fashion as the side cutters that we're going to use. You can see they do work. Okay, it just becomes personal preference. Okay, so let's get started here. We're not going to use that. We're going to use the piece that we already have here. Now we'll get started. The first thing, here's your handout that you have, and the first thing that is on here is to remove the outer jacket. Now, in order to do that, we need to cut through the outer jacket, but not the wires on the inside. We want to keep them in place. So if I was just to squeeze on this, it's just going to cut the wire straight off, the same as it did here. So even if I try a little bit, if I go a little, it's going to cut a whole mess off there. So what you want to do is you want to squeeze the outside just a little bit. You can see I'm not really squeezing that hard. It is depressing the top down. You see that? And actually, if you bend it a little bit, you can see it's already started to cut it there. So you let go. You turn it over. You see it's already started to cut through. It just needs to start. Okay. So now we have this side done and this side done. Now we want to have the top and the bottom to cut. So now we just kind of turn it 90 degrees so that the cutters are the opposite way. And we line it up in the same fashion. And again, we just give it a little squeeze. Not so much that we're trying to cut it, just enough so that it cuts the outside. And you see, if we give it a bend, it's cut. If it's not cut all the way through, just give it a pull and it'll break off. Okay? But it has to be cut in at least, 3 different little spots before it's actually going to do that. So there, we've removed the sheathing, and that's ultimately our goal here. Now, we can run into some problems here in that we just use a cutting tool and it cut through here, but we're unable to see exactly how far it was cutting down. So if we look at these, you'll see there are small nicks in these wires here and here. They're not too bad, but there's some there. And the problem we're going to run into is they can short out between each other, or we may have weakened the wire, and by bending back and forth it may just break right off. So what we don't want to use this section of wire because we've created a problem here, and we don't want to use that extending out here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this string, and this is a stripper string. And what you can do is you hold your wires tight. You grab a firm grip on your wire and you pull it directly back over top of the wire. And in doing so, because this is such a fine, strong, silky string, it will actually, oh, and it just broke. Well, there's a perfect example of how we can continue on. What will happen actually is that string will actually cut through the sheathing, okay? Now the alternative to doing that is actually using a set of these wires, okay? Now when you do that, what you want to do is you want to put a little nick in the end of it, of the sheathing itself. You see how I did that? That's kind of opened up. Now I can grab actually a set of these wires and just pull it back, and you see how it actually cuts through it, okay? Now that does put some strain on the wire, okay? So it's not the preferred method, but it does work. It's obviously effective. You just saw that it's effective. So now in here is more of this string, so I'm just going to show you kind of how that worked. Okay, so I'm going to cut this off. Now whenever you're cutting off the sheathing, make sure you're not cutting off the wires. Okay, so here's some more of this string. You can see again, you just pull it back and it just cuts through it nicely. So when you can, use the string. If there is no string, because some wire, some of the cheaper wire doesn't actually have a string in it, you can use the wires for it, and you can see it does work, and it's more or less just as effective as the string. Okay, so now that we've exposed that, you peel that back, and you take your cutters and you cut the sheathing and the string off. Okay, we don't want the string hanging out and stuff when we put the ends on or after the end is on. Okay, now this is pretty excessive. Originally we cut here and then we were going to peel it back to here, but so I'm going to just cut some of this off. We don't need that much here. Okay. All right, so there we have 3 inches or so, 6-7 centimeters. So now you can see there is these little flaps that are here. We want to make sure that we cut those off, and make sure you leave it flat because you don't want to cut the wires. Okay, so lay it flat, cut those off. Now we're not trying to make it look pretty. All we're trying to do at this point here is eliminate anything from hanging out the bottom of the end when we put it on, or eliminating anything that is going to get caught when we're inserting this into the hole. Okay, so we're just cleaning it off, and we're just any flaps that are there we're gonna trim off. All right, now the next step, if you look into your handout, is we have to remove these twists off the wires because they're not going to feed into the RJ45 end that way. So we have to untwist the wires. It's a pretty simple process. You just kind of unwind them. Okay, and the next one. There we go. Third one. And the last pair. Now what you want to do is when you are untwisting these, you want to try and just keep your pairs together out of the way so that they don't inadvertently get mixed up. Some wire, it's difficult to tell one of the white ones from another one, particularly in the green and the blue. When you have the green and the blue, sometimes this white blue can get mixed up with this white green. So try and just keep your pairs together. Better to be organized than to be trying to fix problems. Okay, so here we have the pairs. They're all undone. What I like to do at this point is they all have this little curl in them, and what I do is I squeeze at the base, this thing there, and I roll them. Let's see if I can get my fingers out of the way. Roll them through my fingers like that, one way and then the other and then back again, And I do that about 3 or 4 times, and you can see that it takes that twist out. Similar to when you're using a pair of scissors on a piece of paper and you're trying to make it curly. It's the same sort of thing. So I take this and I squeeze here and I roll this out and I roll that out and I roll it out. And it's just taking those little waves out of it and making it nice and flat and straight, which is going to be essential when we're trying to insert it into the connector end. So I do that again, back. You see how I roll it through my fingers. I'm kind of bending it and then pulling my fingers along it. Now, it does take a little bit of finger strength, so you're going to have to squeeze really hard. And if you can't squeeze hard, you'll just have to do it more times. The harder you can squeeze, the faster you can straighten it out. But there's nobody's in a rush here, so just take your time, get it right. Better to be organized and do it right than to rush through it and end up with problems that you can't fix later on. All right, so now we have our pieces and they're all straight. Okay, now if you look at your handouts now, what we're going to do is now we're going to start to put our wires in their proper order as they will end up inside the connector. The 568B standard that is the one we're going to use for this cable. When we create the crossover cable, we'll use one side will be a 568B, the other one will be a 568A. What is that? Well, to take all the complication out of it, it's right here on your next page. So the 568B, for when we're doing straight through, both ends are exactly the same. As you can see here, and this side here, they're opposite. Okay, so one is the 568A, one is the 568B. Okay. Now, according to the 568B, we're going to start with the orange pair, the white, orange, orange, white, and then we're going to have a green. The greens are going to be straddling either side of the blues, and then the browns are on the right side. So what I like to do is, and I find this the simplest way to get around it, is if you look at the wire, if you have your pairs and they're all pulled kind of wherever you want them to be, right, kind of separated. If you just kind of look at your wire and you're looking at it one way here, my green is on this side, the brown is there, blue is there. If I rotate now, my blue is here, my brown is kind of in the middle, the green is sort of kind of in the middle too. If I rotate here, now my orange is here, my blue is in the middle, the brown is kind of this way, and then my green is kind of in the middle here, overlapping and a little bit over this way. So ultimately, according to this, I want my orange on this side, my blue in the middle, and my green the same. So this is pretty close to almost where I need it to be, and I haven't done anything. So just by rotating it around, you can get fairly close to the alignment you need, and then from there you can just fine tune it. In order to do that, being as close to the sheathing as possible and having it correct is really the most important. So we're going to have the orange white, or sorry, the white orange, and then the orange white. I'm going to move this in the middle. Okay, so the white orange and the orange white, which is what I have here. Okay, and then right next to that is my white green. So my white green is here, and what I will do is I'll see if I'm moving that, it's kind of going over top and it's pulling that other one. But if I just go around the back of it, if I go around the bottom of it, see, now I can move it over here and I'm not pulling anything else. So it's just making everything go together a little easier. So what I'll do is I'll line that green up right next to it there, squeeze it tight with my finger. Okay, and then I'll give it that same curl pull that I was doing before. And what that's going to do is it just pulls everything straight and lines them up next to each other, and it's nice and easy to work with. Okay, so then according to the drawing, the next one I need here is the blue white. Okay, and again I'm pulling this, but it's pulling the other one over. So if I just, you can see it's pulling over top. So if I just take it around the back, okay, and now it's right next to it. Okay, so I try and wiggle that in there, and I squeeze, usually using my fingernail here, but make sure your fingernails aren't like really long or too strong, because otherwise you can actually cut through the sheathing, but with your fingernail. But in this case, I just kind of put some pressure on it, and I roll my fingers back out it again, the same way. The next one is now I'm taking my blue white, which is this one here, and again I find it's easier if I put it this way, right? And then I squeeze them with my finger and I roll it back out again. This is the simplest way to go about it. Now we're into the green white, so it's almost the solid green here. So I'll put that one and I just push it right up next to it. Right? Push it right up next to it there. Okay, just like that. So actually, if you look at this here, see how it's kind of crossed over? It's probably beneficial if I do this, and I put that underneath there, and I put that one there. See how much nicer that looks? Okay, so now I just squeeze them close together. Squeeze it so it's flat, so I'm ensuring that they're going next to each other, not behind and in front of each other. That's the main purpose of the squeezing, is to make sure that they're flat so that they're beside each other and not over top of each other. Alright, so that looks much better. Now it's the white brown and then the brown white on the outside. So I can just squeeze these together. And again, I just roll it out. Okay. And that's it. So now I take one last look and I ensure my colors are correct. White, orange, orange, white, white, green, blue, white, white, blue, green, white, white, brown, brown, white. And we have white, orange, orange, white, white, green, blue, white, white, blue, green, white, white, brown, and brown, white. So my order is correct. Now, a little trick that I have, because now if I let go of these, they're going to just kind of flail all over the place and I'm going to end up having to start all over. So I always keep one finger squeezing on it at any time. Okay? So now I just move my finger down here underneath so I can get a grip on it down there. And then what I'll do is I'll grab my cutters, because that's a flat surface, and I will just hold it. I'm not squeezing it all, not even a little tiny bit, just enough to actually hold the wires. Okay? And now everything is perfectly in line and it's flat. Now I'll take my end and I will measure it up against my wires, because I want these wires here to end up at the very end of this connector on the inside, right up against those gold pins. And at the same time, I want this blue sheathing to end up right at this step, right there. So if I can do that, I'll end up with a perfect cable. Now, with that being said, you're better off to have this a little bit too long and your sheathing be a little further back than you are for this to be too short and your wires don't go up far enough. Because if your wires don't go up far enough, you're not going to have connectivity. Okay? So that's what we want to ensure, that your wires go all the way up, and a perfect cable, your wires will be all the way up and your sheathing will be here at this shoulder here. Okay? You see that shoulder? Alright. So now I'm going to measure that again. So there we can see the wire, the sheathing and the shoulder are lining up, and the wires are more or less right to the end. So that's exactly where I want them to be. Alright? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this is flat across here and not on an angle like this. Having it on an angle like this is going to be no good, because this end will get to the end and this wire is not going to be connected at all. So we'll have something along those lines, and that's no good at all. Okay? So you want to make sure that it's flat across, okay, and that your end is lined up there. Okay? So that's exactly what we want. We'll hold it again with my finger, because once I cut through this, it's going to let go. So I hold it tight with my finger, cut it off, and now you can see that the ends are flat across. Holding that tight, I now can slide this end into the connector, slowly feeding it up, and you'll see it's going to get a little bit caught as the grooves line up. So you just give it a little wiggle, and this is where making sure you have none of that little sheathing hanging off there, little bits hanging off, is going to make it better for it sliding in. So now I hold the end and I press the wire in, giving this a squeeze so that I'm pressing the wires on the inside and not the sheathing, because the sheathing will move a little bit. So I press that in, and then what I can do is I can look from the side and I can see whether or not my wire is going all the way to the end or not. Okay? So my brown wire here looks like it's a little bit short. I'm just going to give that a little bit extra hard push, and that looks much better. Okay, so now that looks like it's going all the way to the end. Okay, and you can look at it from the bottom. You can see the brown wire there going all the way to the end, and there's my orange. Okay, and my sheathing is right up to my shoulder where I want it to be. Okay, now that little pin there is going to get pushed down, and it's going to squish onto the sheathing, and that's what's going to hold it and stop it from getting pulled out later on down the road. Okay, so now we'll take our crimper. Our crimper is designed in this case for 3 different types of connectors: a 4-pin, a 6-pin, and an 8-pin. This has 8 pins. And what we'll do is we'll put it in there, and it will lock into place. Okay, and I will push into it as I'm squeezing. And you can see this little hammer here goes up and it squishes onto that housing. I'll do it a couple more times here. You see that, how it goes in there? It's going to push in there and squeeze. I always do my crimps 3 times, because then that way you're always guaranteed that you've squeezed it far enough. Now in order to get it out, there's a little lock pin here. If I just pull this right now, it's not going to come out. Or if I push this little lock pin down, then it will slide out. And that's it. That is the connector. It's on. I can see here that it's squished onto the sheathing. You can see there. That's this pin here. And that my pins are all depressed. You can see them here are all pushed down. You see that? Hopefully you can see that. Okay. Now there's nothing hanging out the bottom. I don't have any exposed twisted wires that I can see from down here, because my sheathing went all the way up. That's on there, good and solid. If I give it a pull, it's not coming off. Okay, I don't have any string hanging off of here. All right. So overall, that end at this point is perfect. Okay. The last thing to do is to test it. So we press one end into one side of the tester, and we take the other end and we put it in the other side of the tester. Now, in your handout, you will see that there are several different types of testers. This one here has a remote end that you can take if it's a cable that's inside a wall. You may not have access to both ends at the same time like this. Okay, so now we're going to turn it on, and I'm going to turn that on to automatic, and you can see that pin 1 corresponds. I'm going to turn it off of automatic. So pin 1 on one side corresponds with pin 1 on the other. Pin 2 and pin 2, so on and so forth. Now when you make your crossover cable and you go to pin 1 is going to line up with pin 3 on your next one. And pin 2 is going to line up with pin 6. And then the opposite will be true. 3 here will be with 1, 4 and 5 will be the same. Number 6 and number 2 will be crossed over. Okay, so that's something that we look for. This is a perfect cable. We've tested it. It's working properly. Okay, and now that we've tested it and we know it's working properly, this is a number 4, right? This is a perfect cable. Now it's your turn. Let's see how you do. Good luck.